If I cannot inspire love, I will cause fear. You may recognize that quotation from Frankenstein, a horror classic from Mary Shelley. From Gothic ghost stories to psychological horror to science fiction, women have been the primary architects of dark, speculative literature of all sorts. Satisfy your craving for extraordinary authors and exceptional fiction. Meet the women writers who defied convention to craft some of literature's strangest tales in Monster, She Wrote, a new nonfiction book by two of your podcast hosts, Lisa and Mel. The book will be released September 17th, but you can pre-order now by going to the Quirk Books website or through any major book retailer. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is episode 22 in season 3. Summer is traditionally a time when we step away from our normal episode series to relax and have a little fun. So traditionally, in the last couple of years, we've looked at science fiction. We've looked in particular at movies and talked about a different movie every week. But this summer, we thought that we would try something different and take a look at the Netflix series, The Haunting of Hill House. So what we're going to be doing this summer is we're going to take a few episodes, and in each of our episodes, we will talk about 3 to 4 episodes of the Netflix series, The Haunting of Hill House, which ended up being a total of 10 episodes. And it came out last October, and it is a very, I would say, loose adaptation of The Haunting of Hill House. And so in our discussion, I'm sure we will talk a little bit about the relationship of the TV show to the book, but for the most part, we'll probably be talking about themes and characters in the show itself. And I know that a few of our listeners have said to me that they kind of wondered what our thoughts were on the adaptation. So hopefully this will answer those questions. For me personally, it took me a while to even sit down and watch the series because as a huge Shirley Jackson fan, when I saw the initial trailer and initial information, articles, that sort of thing on the Netflix series, it just seemed so different to me. Like it just took the characters' names and the place name and kind of went on its own thing that I wasn't even sure if I wanted to see it at first. And after several people that I know had told me how much they liked it, I took the plunge and started watching it. And I very much enjoyed it for what it is. And I love the little Easter eggs, the little connections that go back to the novel, The Haunting of Hill House. It still bothers me a little bit that, it's not as true an adaptation as it could be. But adaptation doesn't have to be exact science. You can take something and you can be inspired by something and take it in your own direction. But that's a little bit about my personal response. I kind of avoided it at first because I wasn't sure. And I think it won me over. There are things I really like about it, and I'm glad we're going to be talking about it. What was your response?
Let me just jump in real quick, and since if we haven't been clear yet, let's just go ahead and clear the air that this is going to be full of spoilers. All right. So,
oh yes.
So if you have not yet watched The Haunting of Hill House, please just go ahead and hit pause. Unless you don't mind spoilers, because it will happen. This particular episode, I think we're trying to limit ourselves to the first 3 episodes. So if you kind of want to do a watch along as we talk about it, if you haven't watched it yet, just keep that in mind, that we will be talking about. It's going to be, this particular show is too difficult to talk about without having spoilers. So just wanted to clear the air there. Just wanted to clear the air there before we get any further. And I was going to respond to your question there too, Mel. I was actually in a completely different camp. Love The Haunting of Hill House, the novel by Shirley Jackson. It's great. I had not actually really watched the trailer for the show, so I was going in fairly cold. And after watching the first episode, I'll be honest, I wasn't fully hooked, but I was intrigued, and especially by the ending of it, which we can get to in just a little bit. but my wife and I, we kept watching, and we ended up, I think, watching the first 3 episodes the night because it came out on a Friday, as Netflix tends to release things. So we watched the first 3 on the Friday, and then we ended up finishing the series by the end of the weekend. We ended up binging it because I really got hooked in a couple episodes in, and so did she, and we were just like, you want to watch one more episode? Yeah. And so that was the end of every episode was, one more? Yeah, okay. So, but I tend to, well, like you said, Mel, adaptation is not an exact science, and so I just I turned my brain off, like the critical side of it off while watching it, because I picked up pretty quickly that this was not going to be a close adaptation of the novel, and I was intrigued as to what they were going to do with it, and I'll be honest, I was very, very pleasantly surprised. And it's not going to be this episode, but we'll definitely talk about the one that really hooked me in and is just one of my like favorite episodes of TV from like last year. Like, it was just so good. But that can be for a future episode, and I'll let Lisa give her like preliminary thoughts.
All right. Well, I will go ahead and say, and I'm saying this more for you, Matt and Mel, than even for the listeners right now. And that is, I've only seen the first 3 episodes of the show. So as we do this recording, I am literally watching as we record. So you better just talk about the first 3 episodes. Do not spoil anything for me.
So Mel, should we mention that it was all a dream and they wake up in bed next to Bob Newhart?
Oh yeah, it's totally fine to say that. Yeah.
It was a snow globe the entire time.
Oh no, it was aliens. I knew it. No, okay. So here, and y'all know this, and listeners know this. I love Shirley Jackson, and she's one of my favorite writers. I love her. I love The Haunting of Hill House. I mean, it's not even one of my favorite books of hers, but I love it so much. I've read it multiple times. I have a fondness for the Robert Wise adaptation, The Haunting, and yeah, it's a story that I love. It's the quintessential haunted house story. I love Eleanor so much. I love Theo. There's so much I love about that. I love lines in it. I've always wanted, because of that book, I've always wanted a home that had stone lions out front. And one day I will find the perfect mug that has stars in the bottom. There's so much about that book that I adore. And I was very excited to see that they were making it. And I was excited to see that Mike Flanagan was directing. He did Gerald's Game. Did you guys see that?
I did not.
Neither have I.
It's an adaptation of a Stephen King story or book, I guess. So that was just me going into it. Was just pure excitement. But then before I got a chance to watch it, I was having friends send me messages going, what do you think about this? And that started to get me a little worried. Anyway, I watched the first episode and thought I will never watch another episode of this because it just made me angry. I think because calling it an adaptation, Matt, and I like what you said about adaptation, it's such a tricky thing. But to me, it wasn't even an adaptation. It was like somebody took her book and then cut it up and sprinkled the pieces around. Like, the characters' names were there, but they were all different people. It was just the names. And, the basic storyline was not even there. It was just a haunted house. And I think the thing that really threw me off about the first episode was the fact that they had taken lines of dialogue from the original book and tried to shove it in to the dialogue of the episode. And I could tell. I don't know if other people who weren't as familiar with the book could tell that was happening, but it felt really jarring to me. I really did not like that aspect of it. So I was pretty upset. And I think it's because I had my hopes up so high for it. But one thing I loved about it, and this is something that I love in horror movies, especially movies that deal with the paranormal and TV shows that deal with the paranormal. I love it when directors will play with the edges of the screen. So then that happens a lot in the first episode, where you were following what was the family was doing in the house, and they're kind of in the center of the shot, but then on the edge there's just like a little like kid's face peering out from the corner, or around like a door frame, and you're thinking, why is nobody acknowledging the kid standing in the corner? And then you realize, oh, because it's a ghost. And so I will say, I told people this. I said, if this had been called anything other than The Haunting of Hill House, I would have loved it right away. But because they called it The Haunting of Hill House, I think I had this strong distaste for it. So that's my story. I watched the first episode and then stopped. But then I had so many people who were like, no, trust me, continue watching. And Matt, I think you were one of them. I think you told me to get to like episode 4 or 5 and I would be like hooked. So I did. So anyway, I was planning to go back and rewatch it, and I hadn't, because I had to get over my hurt feelings that it wasn't what I wanted it to be. But I'm glad I did, because just 3 episodes in and I love it now. And apparently I haven't gotten to the good stuff yet.
Oh, just wait.
So.
I'm trying not to talk about some stuff that's coming up. Because I don't want to ruin it for you. You need to see it with fresh eyes without having anything ruined from you. So I guess, should we start by kind of talking about just episode by episode now? Just start with the first episode and kind of go through them, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think that would be fun. Let's just start with episode 1, since we're doing episodes 1, 2, and 3, right?
Well, Lisa, since you're watching this fresh, I'm kind of curious about your take on it.
On the first episode?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you, this is the episode I did not like. This is the one that made me so mad. And I think it is because they had taken the names and put them on different people. And the dialogue bothered me. Because I think they even, some of her Jackson's most iconic lines, they had taken, but given them out of context, like, whatever walked alone, and that just kind of bothered me, because I thought, no, don't take her dialogue and chop it up like that. But they stopped doing that, I noticed, because in episodes 2 and 3, I didn't notice that. So that was good. I think another thing that kind of bugged me is I didn't like the fact that, well, okay, I don't know. This may have just rubbed me the wrong way. And I'm sorry, I like this show, so I don't want to sound like I'm just bashing it. But so one of the things you learn in episode 1 is that it is a group of siblings who are it's the Crane family. And of course that is that's the family that you hear about. That's in Shirley Jackson's novel. It's paranormal kind of investigators coming to stay at the house that used to belong to the Crane family. So you have the Crane family here, and it's about them living in a house that's horribly haunted, I guess. And but they bounce back and forth between the adult children and then when they're in the house as children. And one of the brothers, Stephen, is an author, and he has written a book that has apparently made his family mad, talking about his experience in this haunted house as a child. But the book and this is another thing that annoyed me, the book that he wrote, they're calling it The Haunting of Hill House. And that made me angry again, because I thought, well, no, you're erasing Shirley Jackson now. Because she wrote The Haunting of Hill House. So it didn't strike me as an homage, which I think it was supposed to be. But Yeah, I don't know. It just that bugs me a little bit. But anyway, you have I guess Stephen, who has written this novel about their childhood, and it's become a bestseller. And this is the one thing that I thought was really interesting, that I do like what they're doing with this, is that the siblings all kind of have been affected differently by the trauma of the house, and you're seeing that in the first episode. And this is what I find really interesting, is that some of the siblings, even though they went through this haunting as children, don't believe in the paranormal. And so they don't think that what they went through was like a paranormal thing, which I thought was really interesting. And it seems like they're playing that out a lot. And again, I like the way this was shot. I like the way the siblings kind of deal with the trauma. One of them, I guess, has become like I said, a best-selling author who writes about the paranormal but doesn't believe in it. One of the brothers has become I guess, a drug addict. One of the sisters is like married with children, but she's what is she?
A funeral home director.
A funeral home director. That's right. I was about to say she has kind of a weird relationship with death and dying. And then there's there's two more sisters.
Nell and Theo.
Right. Theo, I do like that they kept Theo as a lesbian.
Mm-hmm.
I did like that part. And she's kind of, I guess, they're showing her as a little bit of a flirt and kind of sleeping around. And then there's Nell. And of course, I want to love Nell because I love Eleanor. I didn't love Nell. And I thought the ending, and we should just probably go ahead and talk about the ending of this episode, but I thought it was a little bit of a cheap jump scare, although I will admit I jumped when I watched it. So shall we talk about what happened at the end of that?
I think we should. I do want to say one thing too, and this is something that you'll also pick up as the show goes on. This is not a spoiler, but each of the episodes does sort of focus around one of the siblings. All of the others are generally still present, but it's a really interesting narrative technique, and it allows for some interesting stuff that will play out. So did just want to throw that out there.
No, I'm intrigued because, and I'm glad you said that. I like it because sometimes I feel like horror does not accurately depict the way trauma will settle differently on different people and how different people will react to that. And that's one thing I do like about this show, is that how it's showing how these adults who went through something horrific as children and how each of them are dealing with it in a completely different way, and how they're kind of equally having trouble moving past it. Because, sometimes I feel like in horror, something bad will happen and then it just is like, oh, hey, yeah, we defeated this thing. Let's move on with our lives. And I'm like, no, you just went through a very traumatic event. Like, show the people living with that now. Anyway, so I do like that. And I like that it focuses in on each of the siblings, I guess. Sorry to cut you off, Matt.
No, you didn't. And honestly, I think that's one of the more interesting things that it does narratively is by focusing in on one of them for each episode. It does this really cool slow reveal, sort of almost like peeling the layers off an onion, where you start to see different things that, because you're sort of trapped in the perspective of that character for the episode, like you're forced to sympathize with them in that moment, but also throughout the episode, throughout the series, you get to see more and more, so you get a fuller view of this story. But like you said, yeah, it's showing how each of them is being affected by this trauma. And so, I mean, taking episode 1, you've got Stephen, who is, well, I mean, he's the classic repression, right? He's the one who's experienced this trauma and is like, nope, didn't happen. Nope, wasn't ghosts, wasn't paranormal, nothing at all, nothing to see here, total skeptic. You know, he's full-on repression, which I think is an interesting way to start the show off by showing the point of view of the skeptic. This show called The Haunting of Hill House. You know it's a ghost story going in from the title alone, and yet the first point of view is, oh no, I just wrote this memoir about this crazy stuff that happened in my family, but I don't believe in all that stuff, you know? I think that was a really interesting choice on their part.
Well, and also Stephen saw the least of everyone on the last night that they talk about over and over again. And even though he did see some supernatural things, he didn't know it like maybe the others did. So it's interesting that the person who experienced the least and is such a skeptic laid claim to the stories of the rest of them. Which you can understand why they're irritated about it. It's kind of problematic to tell other people's stories and then not even believe them.
Oh, yeah, and it does tease out, because I guess kind of we've already said they're spoilers, but they do a good job so far of teasing out kind of the last night of the house. Because in episode 1, they show the ghosts of the house. And in a lot of the scenes, it's just the viewer who is seeing the ghosts. But in some of the scenes, the ghost is actually interacting with the children. And then it kind of teases, at least to the point I'm at in episode 3, they have not shown fully the last night yet. They've been teasing that out. But what we know from, I guess, episode 1 is that on the last night they stayed in that house, crazy stuff was happening. You know, the dad kind of got the kids together in a panic, sent them outside to the car, and the mother does not get out alive. That's basically what we know. And so that alone is a traumatic event in a child's life, is having to, you know, be woken up in the middle of the night and told to leave, and then I guess presumably hear your mother has died. But yeah, it's interesting the way they do kind of tease the ghost, and the way, Mel, as you pointed out, that each of the children are seeing different things. And I imagine, I don't know, but I imagine as the series goes on, it will kind of show more and more like puzzle pieces, you know, of who actually saw what and who was involved with what on that last night. Because from episode 1, it seems like the last night was very important, because they do reference it a lot.
No.
Yeah.
Nothing happened.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell by your laugh that, like, you know, clearly nothing.
So I was just about to say that the way they treat that plays into that idea of perspective that you were talking about, Lisa, which is one of the things that I loved in the novel, is this idea of, like, you know, like you said, not everybody reacts the same thing to something. Not everybody sees the same thing. And so kind of, you know, when you were talking a little earlier, Matt, I was thinking about how every episode at some point, and I don't think this is a spoiler, but because we've already seen it in 1 through 3, every episode that's from somebody's perspective goes back and covers incidents that have already happened, but you see what was going on in that person's time or head or whatever, like before and after what you've already seen. And I saw it, yeah, it goes to what you were saying, Lisa, about the whole, like, the perspective on trauma and how they're differently affected, but also how they each have different pieces themselves, and they never are fully, like, connecting or putting those pieces together, which is what a haunting is, right? It's perceived differently by every single person who experiences it, and it can mean something different to every person. And I thought it was really cool how that aspect of perspective is represented literally in the way that the story is shown to us.
Well, I guess we should probably go ahead and talk about the ending, since we got a little derailed there.
Yeah.
Lisa, do you want to talk about the last bit of episode 1?
Yeah, Nell's a ghost.
Well, not
Steven Caesar.
Not entirely.
Yeah,
She wasn't. She was not a ghost the whole time. She wasn't a ghost sister.
She was alive. And then, but it was one of those things that I think she was alive. Clearly something had been going on with her, because I think out of all the siblings, she was the one who it was difficult to pinpoint what her personality was, other than, like, kind of nervous and jittery and not okay. But she was worried. She was worried about, or everybody is kind of worried about Luke, who's the brother who grew up to become the drug addict, which, oddly, I will say one thing going back now that I've softened on this as an adaptation and not a retelling, or, it's not faithful really to the story and more of just taking the essence of it. I do like the way that they kept certain character traits. For instance, Luke, like just what I know from Luke in the novel, I can totally see him as being he fits well into the drug addict character. So everybody's kind of worried about him. And Stephen is the one, like you said, Stephen is the kind of the classic repressed sibling. And he's the one who seems the most together, but also the one who is in the most denial. And so this all ends kind of in his apartment when he's talking. He walks into his apartment and sees his sister Nell sitting there, and they're talking, and you can tell in that scene. I remember watching this and thinking, this is not right. Like, I can't remember what tipped me off about that scene, but there was one thing that I think is done really well, and this is probably to the credit of Mike Flanagan, is the impending sense of like dread and doom that is in a lot of these scenes is played up really well. And this was one of those scenes where you're just watching it and all it is a brother and sister talking in an apartment, but the apartment is like weirdly sparse, like minimalist, and the tones of the actual colors on the screen are very muted, like blues and grays. It just you just when they're talking, you're like, something is not right. Something here is not okay. And then almost at that exact moment, I was thinking that the brother gets a phone call, I guess from his dad, telling him that his sister Nell had gone back to Hill House, which I guess is just sitting there empty, that he had gone back to Hill House and that she died. And so at that moment, her face does that really weird stretchy thing, which I hate on in ghost movies because it's so freaky. But and then he realizes that his sister is a ghost and that she's talking to him. So over the course kind of episode 1, at least one sibling has now gone back to Hill House and has died. And then in the next 2, you kind of get the aftermath of that death. And the aftershocks of the family trying to come to terms with the fact that Nell has died and has died back in the house. So yeah, that's kind of the big shocker of episode 1. And I will say that scene was really well done. Like that made me jump. It gave me the creepy crawlies.
All right. Well, I guess we should probably move on to episodes 2 and 3. We may have to squish a little bit for time, so we're not doing 2-hour-long episodes here. But well, Lisa, I'm going to keep turning to you for kind of first impressions, just because you're watching it fresh, and
I am.
I mean, I've seen it before, and I saw it in October, and it's now currently June, so it's been a minute since my first viewing. So, what were your thoughts? What were your impressions? Let me just kind of take a step back too and say I'm really glad you waited to watch this show so that we actually can get like the fresh take of somebody watching it for the first time. I think it's really good for what we're doing here.
Well, I have to admit, I was glad we chose to watch this too, just because I knew it would kind of force me to sit down and watch, because I'd had so many people telling me to rewatch it. And I'm glad I did, because in episode 2, I think this was the episode that really hooked me. And here's why. It did not try. I felt like episode 1 was constantly trying to like give winks to the audience about, hey, remember the book? This was in the book. And then by episode 2, it had kind of stopped that, which I was glad of. And it got more into actually the family. This one, it was called Open Casket, and it focused specifically on Shirley.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. See, this is another thing that was odd. All the other characters pretty much come from characters in the book, except Shirley
And Steven.
and Steven. But it was strange to me that they made Shirley. I guess that was a nod to Shirley Jackson, but that just felt was strange. And they kept calling her something weird.
Cheryl.
Cheryl, and I kept hearing it as Cheryl. Anyway, that is not at all. It was not at all what this episode is about. But that was one thing that kind of got me because I kept going, why are they calling her Cheryl? I thought her name was Shirley. And then I realized about halfway through this episode that they were shortening it, and it was weird. At least for me. Anyway, this one focuses on Shirley. She's the one, and this is what I mean. This is an episode that hooked me, because it did show how she's handling the trauma, specifically in the fact that she is now a funeral home director. So she's done she's a mortician basically, and it's one of those old fashioned, like, small town. I don't know if y'all ever were around many of these, but I remember going to funerals where it was set up like that, where it was the family's home. Where the family kind of lived on the second floor, and then the funeral home was on the first floor, and then they have a basement, which is where they do their work with the bodies. And so Shirley, of course, being a mortician, decides that she is going to take on the duty of, I guess, embalming her sister Nell, and everybody tells her it's a horrible idea. And this is one thing that I loved is even just the reaction. Like at one point, I think it was Steven who was on the phone, and he kind of looks, I don't know if it's his girlfriend or wife at this point, but he looks at a girl in his apartment, not a ghost this time. And he looks at her and kind of says, oh, Shirley's doing it herself. And like, she just had kind of this brief look of horror on her face, because everybody knows it's a terrible idea. Like, you don't need to be embalming your sister, especially one that you're close with. But she is determined to do it because she's like, well, of course I'm going to do it. This is my job. And to me, again, that just shows the lasting effects and the lingering effects of trauma, because she doesn't even realize, I don't think, what a bad idea it is until she finishes the embalming and kind of goes through a haunting experience, to the point that she actually sees, I don't know if it's a hallucination, because she's not in Hill House, which is interesting. But she sees the ghost of her mother in a really horrifying way while she's down there. But in the meantime, it is also kind of doing flashbacks back and forth between modern day and her childhood in Hill House, in particularly this box of kittens that she has. And she's trying to take care of these kittens, and one by one they die, which is really horrific. That was just really horrific and upsetting. But then it was also interesting to see how you kind of see the inklings of a really caring, nurturing person, with also this kind of close proximity to death, how she would grow up to be who she is. And just on a side note, right after I watched this one, the next day, I stayed up late at night to watch it. And the next day, my son found a kitten in the front yard, and I about peed my pants. He comes running in going, "Get a bowl of milk, I found a kitten." And I was like, "No, you did not."
Is the kitten alive?
The kitten is still alive. But I just was having, like, the whole time. I mean, it was the sweetest little kitten, and they had a blast. My boys had a blast playing with it. But the whole time I was having flashbacks to this, because there's a really horrific moment where Shirley is a child, and I love this scene so much, where she was having a burial for the first cat that died, and she's holding it in her hands, and she says, "Oh, it's breathing." And her parents are like, no, the cat's dead. We need to bury it. She's like, no, it's breathing. And so she starts like, rubbing the little kitten in her hands and, oh, come on, little kitten. And it's such a sweet moment. And then like this beetle crawls out of the cat's mouth. And you realize it's not what she thinks it is. And of course she drops it and screams and runs away, and it's horrific. And of course they mirror it, because the same thing she hallucinates and thinks is happening to her sister too, as she's doing it. It's so well done, but just, I don't even know if I can think of words. What did y'all think about that? The kittens and the sister on the involving table.
Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I was just going to say that entire episode just sort of made me generally uncomfortable, for those exact reasons that you were talking about, the embalming the sister, and then what happens with the kittens. Like, I felt like I knew something was going to happen, and then when it did, especially like finding the kittens dead and all of that, and what you just described with the beetle, I was just uncomfortable the entire time, and I think of all the episodes, it's one of my least favorites just for that. Like, there are other episodes that have some genuinely, like, whoa, that's really weird, oh, that's really creepy. Wait till you get to Theo's episode. Not Theo, I'm sorry, Luke's episode. That's got some really, really, like, spine-tingling stuff for me, but for some reason, Shirley's, I guess it's the kittens, I think, really. Just, like, I knew that they were going to die pretty much as soon as she found them, and I didn't want to see it. I didn't want it to happen, and then it did happen, and yeah. I'm sorry, Mel, what were you going to say?
I agree, basically. I thought that the episode in some ways, I mean, we're going to say this over and over again, I'm sure, but this particular episode was kind of its interesting meditation on death, and going back to what you were talking about, Lisa, with the idea of grief and trauma. For Shirley, dealing with the loss of her mother and the fact that she's still haunted by what happened in the house and by her mother is to fix things, because she didn't want to look at her mother's dead body, but the funeral director fixed it. And that's kind of why she does what she does. And so for her, I think, even though it's probably not a good idea to do what she did, for her, they were all ignoring Nell. Like, Nell doesn't say too much in the first episode. She even is trying to get people's attention by calling them. And even when she's dead, she tries to get their attention and nobody listens. And so I think for Shirley, it's almost like guilt and penance. Like, it's like, I have to do this for Nell, so she's taken care of and nurtured. And, I want to do what was done for our mom for Nell. But there's also this, like, I hung up on her and I didn't get in touch with her and I didn't make sure I knew what was going on with her. And so I think there is also that aspect to it as well. But yeah, the kittens were totally creepy. Two of the things I noticed watching the episodes again, because I'm watching them as we go, but this is my second time watching most of them, my third time watching a few of them, because I used one of the episodes when I was teaching this last semester. But when they're looking at the 5 kittens before they start dying, Luke is like, there are 5 kittens and there are 5 of us. And I'm like, oh, don't do that. And then, of course, the first words Olivia says in episode 1 is everyone alive? And so there's these little moments throughout the show where they make these comments and you're just like, oh, man. There's this underlying kind of, like you guys said, underlying dread that they have no clue what's going to happen, but we kind of do, because of the whole time shifting thing.
Yeah, I don't have faith in any of the Cranes coming out of this alive, but I may be wrong. I haven't seen it. Well, and I think the whole kitten thing played it up really well too, in that and this kind of brings it up what I think a really good haunting story will do, what a really good haunted house story will do, or paranormal story, in that it takes a moment that really could be paranormal or not. Like with the cats, like, is it a coincidence that there's 5 of them? I mean, there are things that happen in the house that are definitely paranormal, But like the kittens, it's kind of one of those things. Well, were they just sick kittens? Like the mother Olivia seems to think, she was like there was something wrong with them. Like they were sick kittens. They were not going to survive anyway. Okay, well, was that the case? Or was it the house? That kind of devoured them. And I like that because that does kind of add, I think, to the sense of doom that kind of goes throughout. Is it because you're kind of wondering, like, wait a minute, yes, that's a horrific thing to happen. But was it the house? Was this natural? And I enjoyed that. And I did like you said, Mel, I'm glad you pointed out that Shirley wants to fix things. She wants to make death look palatable, and that is played up throughout the episode. And I like that a lot because that probably says a lot to her guilt too over things.
Well, and even though they all are estranged from the father in every single episode he's in, he talks about how he can fix something. He can fix it. He can make it better. And we haven't mentioned this yet, but Hill House is a flip for these people. It's like you're watching HGTV.
We learned that in episode 2, because I think in episode 1 it didn't play that up, but in episode 2 we learned that it is a flipped house.
And so they're trying to they basically bought Hill House to make money off of it. And I kind of love that. I can't really think of, well, every haunted house story comes down to economic concerns because someone buys a house and it's terrifying and they can't leave because they sunk their money into it. But I love the idea of making it a flip because that is totally what's going on right now. Every TV show is about, I'm going to buy this house and flip it for more money. And so I loved what they did with that. In the series, I thought that was really another aspect of dread that's working throughout.
And there are some really well done things too, because you bring that up, and this was supposed to be like their last flip, right? Like it was, the idea was that if they could fix it and get enough money, that they could build their forever home. And I really, talk about an ominous phrasing, right? Because as soon as Olivia said, well, this is our forever home, and she had the little drawing, I guess, and then I guess the model was built.
Yeah, Shirley has the model in like this weird shrine to Olivia,
right?
In her office.
You see at one point, this is one of the moments where I said I really kind of smiled, because it's when something this is when something paranormal is going on. It's as soon as Shirley left the room, and the lights flicker in the little model house.
Two times for coming home.
Right. So they're flipping this house solely to make money so that they can build their dream home, basically, which they call their forever home, which that was their first mistake. You don't call it your forever home. But yeah, there is an obsession, and you're right bringing up Hugh, because they haven't done much with the father yet, although he seems to be very nice and loving and wanting to fix things in the flashbacks, but as adults, he's largely missing. So I'm curious to see how they play that up. I have ideas, but I don't know. I may be pulling it from the book, because Hugh Crane in the book was not a nice man.
No.
So, yeah, don't tell me anything. I don't want any hints. All right. Well, I don't want to speculate on that too much. But I do want to talk about episode 3 a little bit, because that was Theo's, and this was really interesting to me. She wears gloves as an adult, which you find out that it's because she can feel things, or she's almost like psychic through touch, if that makes sense. Like she can get a reading on people. And in fact, her mother gives her that. And we also learned that her mother apparently had this, and that she also had really bad headaches that may have been tied to it. So there's a psychic aspect, which of course is kind of a throwback to Eleanor, and Theo, of course, was being brought in as a psychic, or as psychics, to investigate Hill House in the Jackson novel. So they kind of bring that up, but in this case, she is using it to investigate. She's working as a child therapist with trauma, actually. So you would think she'd be about the healthiest one of all of them, but she ends up helping a child who has Mr. Smiley. Theo uses her gift, at least in this episode, to learn that Mr. Smiley is really the foster dad who is abusing the little girl. That storyline just seemed to be a little addition just to see, just so we could see Theo's power. She goes, this is what was really interesting. She goes back to the morgue and takes off her gloves and touches Nell's forehead and sees something horrific or feels something horrific. We don't know because we're not shown it. But she screams. And we get a little bit more about that last night in Hill House, but not much. We know that I guess she had like touched her father. But I don't know, but we don't really get much. Like I said, they're knocking off little puzzle pieces or giving us little puzzle pieces of what happened that last night. And so we kind of get what Theo saw in that last night. Oh, and there was also, I can't believe I forgot this, the really horrific dumbwaiter incident, which was terrifying. Because as soon as her brother wanted to get in there, just as a mom, I was like, oh no, this is going to end badly. And that's not even saying anything about the creepy crawly thing in the basement. But yeah, we just basically learned that Theo is very caring. She's very nurturing. She wants to right things in the world. She wants to kind of speak up for victims. And she's psychic. And I don't at all blame Luke for whatever he is going through now, because that scene was terrifying when he goes down to the basement and gets stuck there.
Yes, that whole scene. Oh.
Yeah, y'all talk about that.
I don't know what else there is to say except, I mean, it's such a great job of suspense and building that tension and everything. Oh, yeah, yeah. Mel, what are your thoughts on the dumbwaiter? I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. The dumbwaiter thing is terrifying, and I figured it was going to be bad from the very moment it appears. Especially when Mrs. Dudley, who I don't understand Mrs. Dudley's character, but whatever. When she tries to stop them, and Theo realizes that she's scared. You have this other kind of aspect to, there's something going on here. The other thing I thought was interesting with the dumbwaiter thing, besides it being terrifying, is that it's one of the moments that recurs over and over again where no one believes the kids when something paranormal happens that's actually real. And and that is what hurts Nell and Luke so much, is that people don't believe them. And that moment when Theo touches him and realizes he was telling the truth, and then tries to find the spot to help. Theo builds walls, and she's cold, and she has some issues with relationships, but you see that she truly does care and truly does want to help people. And I think that's one of those moments when Luke is just like, nobody believes me about any of the things, that stuff I'm putting in my pictures and what I saw down there. And I think we talked about that actually in our series on kids, is this idea of like having something traumatic happen and having no one believe you or no one help you. And Theo even grows up to be someone that tries to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a driving force. The scene, and you see that in Luke's face after the dumbwaiter when they finally pull him up, and he is rightly terrified. But his shirt is torn, and he says, the thing like grabbed me basically. And Olivia almost immediately, his mother, she just says, "Oh, you must have gotten it caught." And I thought the same thing. I was like, yep, that probably right there is the moment that really began not necessarily. I mean, of course, seeing the monster or whatever the thing is, which, as far as I can tell, it was a dead bootlegger pirate crawling down there. Uh, they didn't tell what it was. But that we learn because Theo, in one of her flashbacks, Theo finds she's determined to prove her brother right, like you said, Mel, and she finds the basement crawl area, and her mother tells her, like, oh, well, there are these ledger books, and it obviously it wasn't in the plans because it was like from bootlegging days, and it's where they kept their alcohol, and she kind of explains it away, just ignoring the fact that I don't know, Theo finds the piece of her brother's pajamas down there, and that still isn't enough evidence for people to believe him that he saw something horrific. Yeah, that was just spooky. I will say that the visuals in this, if you're looking for something just scary and atmospheric, this hits the spot. Because the scares are really well done. Like, even the jump scares, they're well deserved, and just spooky. Like, whatever that thing is crawling, I'm hoping we learn what it is. It was
Yeah.
creepy. Do we learn what it is?
We're not supposed to give you any spoilers.
I mean, I think I know, but I don't want to say anything. Because this show is playing with time.
Mm-hmm.
So his time has got to be like looping around on itself is what I'm thinking, but I don't know.
Oh, time doesn't mean anything in this show. It's like somebody eats an apple in the present and then they're eating one in the past, and it gets even more complicated as we go.
And they really did that in Theo's episode well, because that's where they started looping time, because they showed in episode 2, they show Nell's body being like taken down from the car, and the sisters are out there waiting, and Theo is like, I can't deal with this, and walks away, and you think it's her like grief, but then you learn it's her anger in episode 3, because they replay the scene, but once you know what you know about Theo, you kind of know this was her, like, she's angry at her sister. She was like, because she even says, she's like, she knows what suicide does to a family. Like, she's mad at her sister basically for killing herself. She's like, she knew better. Like, we'd lived through this once. Why would she do this to us again? Type of thing. And I thought that was really well done, because I was like, it was essentially the same scene played in both episodes, but they played differently because you had more backstory. And so I'm hoping that all of these weird hauntings start to make sense towards the end, because we'll have more information.
One thing I want to add, and it's not necessarily related to the hauntings per se, but there's so many really great emotional, like, gut punches in this show. Like, you really care about these people, and the moment when the kids want to know what's going on, and the moment when you find out Theo's angry and grieving her too, and the other one, I tear up when the mom tells Theo at the end that it runs in the family to be sensitive, and that what Shirley says in her sleep is actually important because she's kind of clairvoyant. Nell also, said that the house was loud, and she says Theo feels cold all the time and senses things. And when she gives her the gloves and tells her they'll talk about it as she gets older, I just was like, that moment, because we know as the audience, and Theo knows to a certain extent because she's seen her mother's future accidentally, or some scary aspect of her mother's life. Yeah, that moment where you're just like, oh man, like, that's just, yeah. And it's also the first time we realize that Olivia's issues with headaches that's connected to being sensitive is being messed with by Hill House. Is that episode as well. But yeah, that moment when she's talking to Theo is just so powerful and so sad.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you, now that I've seen 3 episodes, I'm sold on it. Like, I'm glad I did not stop after episode 1, because for as mad as episode 1 made me, I really enjoyed episode 2 and 3, and apparently it just gets better. So I really look forward to watching the rest of these. And I don't know, I hope our listeners will join us either on a first watch with me or maybe a rewatch of this show. And we'll kind of join in on us as we're dissecting it a bit because I'm excited. I mean, I'm ready to go watch the next episode, which I believe is Luke's episode. I think that's the one that's going to focus in on Luke. I'm not completely sure, but
it is.
Anyway, I'm excited.
Oh, we'll have a lot to talk about with the next 3. That's for sure.
Yay! All right. Well, I hope our listeners will join us in watching this and listening to us. Thank you so much for joining us as we've discussed these first 3 episodes. It has been a lot of fun. You can find us on social media. We're out there on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. We have a website, www.nofearcast.com. We'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts. So, come find us. Let us know what you're thinking. And as always, it has been great. Thanks for listening.